All right. Good morning. There you are.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All righty. Good morning, everyone. It looks like we're just about ready to get our webcast kicked off for today. With a quick sound check to our presenters today. Heather, you'll do a quick sound check for me just real quick. All right, Heather, try that one more time. All right. I'm not getting you through, Heather, but we'll come back to that when we get to your portion of the webinar. Very good. Good morning.
Okay, can you hear me now?
There we go. Now we're
I figured out the problem, so I think we're good to go.
All right, sounds great. Welcome everyone to the final webinar or the webcast that's concluding our water loss control statewide training program. We hope you've enjoyed and gotten a lot out of the program so far. Appreciate those of you who have stuck with us and gotten to the finish line. What we're going to be covering today is a summary of the program, a quick look back, a quick look at where we are now, and also a quick look ahead. A couple of logistics for today's webcast. If you are watching and you have questions that you would like to enter at any time, there's a Q&A menu in your screen platform there. You should be able to type that in. If you're unable to access that or can't figure that out, you're always welcome to send your questions to this email address, jmarkham@unm.edu. And James or Heather, let me know if I need to adjust my sound at all as we proceed through today's webcast.
Yeah, you sound good. And just as a reminder, it's the chat box. If you want to use the chat box to enter any questions, enter them at any time, and then we'll hold them until the end. But feel free to type into the chat box any questions you have, and at the end we'll just go over any questions that we had or any comments that you have.
All right, that sounds great. Thank you, Heather. All right, here's a quick look at what we're going to be covering today. I'll spend the next few minutes doing a review of the water loss content that was covered on the 4 training circuits. We'll have a couple poll questions to make sure everybody out there in webcast land is alive and awake. And we're going to do some review of some of the class surveys, evaluations, some of the feedback that we got from the participating students, as well as a review of the applied activities that you engaged in if you participated in those circuits. At the end, we're going to do a call for water audits. That's kind of our call to action from this closing point of the program, and we'll tell a little bit more about that. And then we're going to ask our friends at NMED to provide some summary remarks. So should be a fairly efficient and straightforward webcast today. Just as a reminder, this is brought to you by the New Mexico Environment Department, and the trainers for the program have been the Southwest Environmental Finance Center and Cavanaugh. Quick introduction, my name is Will Jernigan. If you came to the classes, then we had the opportunity to meet. And from the Southwest Environmental Finance Center today, presenting is Heather Himmelberger, and we will hear from Heather a little bit later in the webcast. So I'm going to jump right in, and we're going to cover some of the basic concepts that we essentially covered in the 4 circuits. These 4 basic concepts were divided up among the 4 training sessions that occurred starting last November through this past May. And the first concept we covered was the concept of water auditing, in effect creating a water balance and understanding what this term is called non-revenue water and what goes into it, what makes it up. So that's what we're going to hit first today in our review. The whole point of this review is reinforcement of the things that you learned in class and just getting those refreshed in your mind as you move forward and figure out your next steps for your water loss program in your utility. The AWWA, American Water Works Association, has developed a free software that's made available to do step 1, which is creating a water balance. So this is a freely available tool that allows a utility to plug their information in and to use that tool to actually calculate a water balance and spit back out or report back out the non-revenue water components for a given year, and typically it's done on a 12-month period, an audit. In there's a handful of inputs. A lot of them are defaults, or in some cases not applicable. So all in told, it ends up being somewhere about 10 to 12 inputs in the free water audit software. If you have not had a chance, if you've been through this class, hopefully you've downloaded this tool already. But if you have not had a chance, you can go to the URL located in the bottom right of your screen. It is a free download available from the American Water Works Association. The way the tool works is it's built on the concept of a water balance, wherein we put water into the system. We know that it can neither be created nor destroyed. So all of the water that goes in breaks into these two boxes, either authorized consumption or water loss. We further break it down into what's billed versus unbilled, and that helps us to identify what in our system out of the total water we supply becomes non-revenue water, or in essence water that does not return revenue back to the utility. It's made up of 3 components. Each of those components it behaves differently. Each of them exerts a different cost impact, and each of them requires a different set of tools for control. Starting up at the top, hitting these quickly as we move through our refresher concepts. Unbilled but authorized consumption, everybody has it. You have to fight fires. Most systems have to flush water for one reason or another. It happens, it just you don't recover revenue from it because it's not charged. There's not a paying customer for that consumption. Moving down to the bottom, real losses. This is system leakage, water that's physically escaping the system. It essentially is costing at the wholesale rate, or what it costs you to either produce or acquire that water. When you leak it out, that's the cost that you're out of pocket. Different from that is this term called apparent losses. That's in the middle of our screen. These are losses that really hit the economic side of the utility. They're revenue losses that occur when meters don't catch everything that's passing through, or water goes unbilled either through a billing system issue or through theft. So these are different ways in which non-revenue water happens, and it is important to break them into their components because they require different tools for control, and they also have very different costs. And when we get a little bit covered to some of the later concepts in minutes, we'll reinforce this notion that you have to break a complex problem down into its parts in order to be effective at controlling that total problem. In class we learned about the term unaccounted for water is now abandoned officially. It was actually officially abandoned in 2003 by the American Water Works Association. Unfortunately it's fairly common in the United States, but it is making its way out of the terminology, and it's being replaced by the concept of the water balance and the term of non-revenue water. It's basically ineffective because it doesn't break a complex problem down into its parts like we just reflected on with non-revenue water, and it's also generally not consistently calculated from one place to the next. So the other thing that we move away from, actually, and this is a little less intuitive, but it is something that we are very much wanting to move away from, and that is looking at water loss as a percent of supply. If your water loss is X% this year and it changes to a different percentage next year, the challenge is that you don't know if it changed because your water loss got better or worse, or simply because your sales changed, your total consumption went down or went up. So it's highly sensitive to consumption, and it's just not a very good metric. So what we want to do, and your takeaway messages regarding unaccounted for water and the metric of water loss as a percent of supply, is that it is an obsolete technology. It did have a time and a place where it was considered the best way to look at something, but today that's not the case. And we move ahead and there's a better way. So what is that better way? It is these 3 metrics, and these are the 3 metrics that the AWWA free water audit software present back once the utility has populated their information in. Validity, value, and volume. The biggest gear is validity. We have to be able to assess how reliable the metrics in the audit are And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a few minutes when we get into our refresher on gremlin hunting. The value and the volume, those are really the numbers that matter. How much water are you losing and what is it costing you? That's the relevant information you need to then decide where to place your priority and what tool to pull out of the toolbox. So that's a quick review of basic concept number 1, creating a water balance, utilizing the free AWWA water audit software, and breaking and using that tool, breaking it down into unbilled consumption, apparent loss, real loss. So the next concept we covered, this was in class 2, was the notion of testing the validity. And we have to be careful not to take information that's coming out of our systems, be it the production systems, the billing systems, etc., necessarily take it at face value, because a lot of those systems in many cases were not specifically designed to give you the information that you're asking it for the purposes of the water audit. So in there we looked at the data validity score and the metric screening. And you may recall from class we talked about this notion of gremlins. We use the analogy of gremlins because errors in the data are not coming from necessarily, and in most cases they're not coming from human errors where someone's doing the math wrong or getting the figures mixed up. What is coming from is these systems have these embedded inaccuracies that exist and they occur. We call them gremlins because they're persistent, they're kind of out of sight, but behind the scenes working, and they're also wreaking havoc on the accuracy of your water balance. So we'll get to those gremlins in just a moment. The process that we reviewed for assessing the validity of the data inputs, the first step we identified was to assemble your supporting documents. What are those documents? Those are the production records, those are the billing records, those are the detail behind the inputs that go into the audit that allow you to essentially trace the breadcrumbs from where those numbers are calculated. If you don't have that backup information, it's incredibly difficult to assess how reliable the final number is. And so that's why we always start with getting good supporting documents. Developing those data inputs from that supporting document. As we're developing it, we're looking for those gremlins, and I'll tease out those gremlins in just a moment. And once we have our audit populated, we check the metrics. We don't just and say, okay, my job's done. We do a sanity check. We see if the numbers are looking crazy, and we look at how those numbers compare to typical ranges for water utilities in the industry. And then that last important question is, okay, the metrics are telling me this type of story. Is that story consistent with what type of water loss management activities are happening in the utility? All right, so for those of us who remember the movie from 1984, our gremlins that we talked about in class, a few of these just to refresh ourselves. Our gremlins on the production side, those gremlins that can create error in the measurement and reporting of how much water we produce. By the way, you may remember we said this a couple times in class. That's the most important number in the whole water balance. So meter wear, meters can wear out and they can become less accurate over time. If the meter location is not properly sited, if it's too close to a bend or something that's causing disturbance, if it's the wrong meter for the application and it wasn't designed to measure the right flow, that can play in. Meter programming and where the data gets archived. All those are places that those gremlins can introduce and create error in that data. So we've got to be on the lookout for odd patterns, any anomalies in the production, data gaps, things like that. Here's a quick example of a, let's see, what did we say, gremlin number 3, number 2, meter location. So in this case, the meter is poorly sited because it is placed next to a bend, and if you're following along at home, the meter is actually located right next to the red apparatus. It's about here. So there is turbulence in that water, and meters need smooth flow conditions to measure accurately, as an example. So that's on the production side. On the billing side, we talked about a few gremlins that can occur, And the thing that we love about billing systems is that they're like snowflakes. They're unique, and they're all designed, and it's a piece of custom software. And some of them were designed to report water balance volumes better than others, but there's not one that I've ever met that was specifically designed for this purpose. So we've always got to be on the lookout for duplication of volumes, pulling in non-potable volumes. Even basic water systems have sewer volumes that get tracked, and even some have other types like indirect or potable, reuse water, other types of volumes. So we got to be careful for that. Missing volumes and mismatched time frames. Our customer meter readings do not naturally line up with our supply meter readings. So we have to be careful when we go to the billing system and ask it, give me this volume because I need to plug it into my water audit. It may not know exactly what you're asking it for, or it may not be able to tell you exactly the 12 months from January 1st to December 31st for true customer consumption. Here is a few interesting examples we looked at in class of those types of gremlins in the billing system, and I'll just hit these quickly as a refresher. On non-residential meters, some of those bigger ones, sometimes we see these spike anomalies where it's clipping along at a certain amount of consumption, and all of a sudden it jumps way up, and there's this odd anomaly that creates, and in many cases it's just a misread on the meter itself. Perhaps it got caught in the billing process, but in the point of archiving that volume into the billing software, which is the place that the report is pulling from, it did not get archived correctly. In residential size meters, here in the middle of the screen, we see a few examples where we have spikes on these small meters that are clipping along at a certain amount of consumption, and all of a sudden there's this crazy number, and this occurs in many cases for the same reason. It's a misread. On the other side of the spectrum, you can have not a spike but a blank, where consumption may be clipping along and all of a sudden there's a missing month. Well, sometimes that can occur if there's a stopped meter, and if you have a stopped meter, you may catch it on the high-low flag on your billing process, and it may even get rectified for the purposes of the bill. But archiving that volume in the billing software, many times that does not get retroactively corrected. All this said is these gremlins can wreak havoc when it comes time to pull your total authorized consumption volume of what you billed for the year from your billing system. If you're not watching out for this kind of stuff, it can absolutely affect the accuracy of that number, and we've got to be careful. So in the validation step, we talk about checking the metrics. These metrics are the ones that are supplied from or provided from the AWWA software. We've already talked about moving away from using these percentage figures, and so that's why we say don't use these numbers. They are included in the tool, or the current version of the tool. They will be removed likely from future versions of this audit software. So the ones you really want to dial into are these volumetric components, or these volumetric indicators. And we provided some typical ranges for how these metrics come in. And the key here is to ask yourself down here, are they inside the range? Does my metric fall inside of a typical range? And if the answer to that question is no, there is a good chance that there is a gremlin that has not yet been found. It doesn't guarantee it, but it says that there's a pretty good chance that there's an error somewhere hidden in the data. There's a gremlin floating around, maybe in the billing software, or maybe in the production volumes. Maybe the meter itself is not registering accurately, or some other gremlin that's at play. And then if the answer to that question of are they in the typical ranges is yes, the last question you have to ask yourself is, how does that compare to my management practices for water loss? An example is, if my loss metrics show low levels of loss, let's say a typical range on the leakage index was 2 to 10, and I've got something that's close to the 2. Well, what I need to ask myself is, does that make sense with my water loss practices? Do I have leak detection activities in place that would be consistent with showing low levels of water loss? And if the answer is no, once again, you need to evaluate, hey, does that mean that there could possibly be an error or a gremlin that I need to go back and do some more checking for. So all this is in kind of wrapping up in this step 2. This is not quite ready to jump into analysis and even picking the next steps of attack in my program. This is all step 2, test the validity. You want to make sure that you're very comfortable that we've identified any gremlins that are at work before moving to step 3. Once you have done that, we are ready to move step 3, and we're ready to basically break down those components of non-revenue water, analyze them, and get myself ready for moving to step 4, which is making a plan of attack. So those components, in the water balance, we see what those components are. Over here on unbilled authorized, we have those that are metered. Sometimes those are government buildings or other types of unbilled facilities. If you have them, you may not have them, but they could have them. And flushing, which exists in every system as well. In the apparent losses, we've got the components of theft, under-registering meters, and billing system issues. And then in the real losses, we've got the 3 types of leakage. And if you remember from our class, we talked about this as the 3 buckets of leakage. One point of order is that the free water audit software will identify and break down the components of unbilled authorized consumption and apparent loss into their subcomponents. However, the free water audit software does not break down total real losses into the 3 buckets. That requires a follow-on step of doing what's called leakage component analysis. And in class, we learned about the notion of leakage component analysis, taking that total real loss volume from the water audit and breaking it into the 3 buckets, because each of these 3 buckets is behaving differently. How do you do that? Well, in class we talked about using your repair records to do a best guess estimate of how much leakage came to the surface, and we call that reported leakage. Your system data that you use, mostly the stuff that you already have in hand for your top-down water audit software inputs, you can use that to with a formula to develop this notion called background leakage. And the definition of background leakage is the small leaks at the joints and small cracks or small breaks in the pipes themselves that are creating very, very small leaks that amass over the whole system. And in some cases, some systems, this background leakage actually does comprise a large portion of the leakage, and you have to be very careful for that, because background leakage does not generate enough noise for acoustic leak detection to be effective. You can't find it. You can't hear it, and therefore you can't find it using acoustic leak detection. So you can imagine how important it'll be if you have high levels of real loss, but most of that is background leakage. Before you go out in the field and start looking for it with a leak survey, you need to know that, because your leak survey is not going to be able to help you very much. Quick note on the type of data you can start to track if you're not tracking already, and this is one of the applied activities for our homework assignments in class, is the break type. Is it a main or a service? It's important to distinguish where a break or repair is occurring. Location of it, the size of the line, and a timestamp of when did you learn about the break and when was it fixed. Most of that type of stuff, even if you have a basic work order system that you are tracking these types of repairs in, these are all fairly standard. Some other data that you'll need in hand to do the leakage component analysis is the total volume in the storage, roughly the average age of your pipe network, and then of course the data from your AWWA water audit. The real takeaway here is that all of this information is typically fairly easy to get, and if you're not already tracking it, it is fairly easy to begin tracking. And that's one of the messages that we hope comes loud and strong out of this training program, is even if you're not doing some of these things already, the most important thing is to start and get started, and then a year from now you look back and all of a sudden you've got some good data you can work with. So rounding out the component analysis discussion, the top-down water audit provides a total real loss volume. We use break records to find or to estimate the leaks that came to the surface. We use a formula to estimate the background leakage, and what's left over becomes this middle category of unreported leakage, and that is the leakage that can be targeted with acoustic leak detection. In class, we talked about this three-bucket analysis, and we identified that it matters how your three buckets relate to one another, and if in this example that we're looking at on the screen now, they have a large amount of background leakage. And so for them, which tool to choose, acoustic leak detection is actually not going to be one of the most effective ways for them to combat leakage in their system. Rounding out our four concepts, last couple minutes here of review, we talked about once we have created a water balance, we have looked for gremlins, we've analyzed our components including the three buckets of leakage. Then we get to prioritizing which ones do I need to work on first, and maybe even more importantly, which ones can I not worry about? Which ones are not really shouldn't be prioritized. We did an exercise in class called the toolbox triage, where we looked at a few different scenarios and we said, hey, which of the components of non-revenue water should be prioritized, and therefore which tool should I pull out of the toolbox? And we use this basic toolbox as our go-by. You can see that different tools like doing a billing system audit versus an acoustic leak survey, it's going to address a different component of non-revenue water. It's also going to have a different level of cost. So I need to keep that in mind. And then and finally, we looked at a couple examples. All of this information at the top is the output of the free water audit software. The information at the bottom is the output of the leakage component analysis. So if you take those steps, get your water audit software populated, data validity assessed, and your three-bucket analysis performed, you can look and say, hey, what is the priority here? And especially in terms of overall cost, the dashboard and the water audit software will present that information to you, and you can see which components are exerting the greatest amount of cost. In this case, the orange bar, which is real loss, and the blue bar, or the purple bar, excuse me, which is customer metering inaccuracies. One more example, in this case, the leakage overall is by far the biggest cost impact, and the next biggest, once again, is customer metering inaccuracies. So for this system, they can see that's where some priority needs to be placed, and maybe more importantly, they can see all of these others where priority should not be emphasized. All right, so rounding out our four concept review, we talked about first step is to create a water balance. You download the free water audit software, populate it with your system information, including your water balance volumes. That tells you what your non-revenue water, how it breaks down into those three primary components: unbilled consumption, apparent loss, and real loss. The next thing we have to do before we go any further is to test the validity. We have to look for those gremlins. And I would advise that we start with the assumption that gremlins are there and we got to find them. And then we use that exercise to either find them or prove to ourselves that they're not there. We go to step 3 after we've done that. We need to analyze the components, and we've got to take that next step of doing the 3-bucket analysis on leakage to do that. And then the final step is to look at which components are exerting the greatest amount of cost and to prioritize those. So in closing of the concepts review from our training circuit from last November to this past May, I'll share you just a couple of quotes here. And they speak to, the first one is from Abraham Lincoln: give me 6 hours to chop down a tree and I'll spend the first 4 sharpening the axe. You noticed out of the 3 concepts, or the 4 concepts, the first 3 are really planning and analyzing. We want to make sure that when we go to intervene, when we go to the field to do leak detection, when we go out and test and change meters, when we replace pipes, when we go and do anything, those are expensive endeavors. We have to make sure that we are directing our resources wisely, and that is what the N36 method, or the water audit method that we covered in this training course, is really dialing in on, making sure that we're being very smart with our efforts. And the last quote I'll leave you with is from our friend Yogi Berra. He was always full of good quotes. If you don't know where you're going, you'll end up someplace else. So with that, Heather, I am going to turn it over, and James, I think you may drive screen control from here, and we'll go to Heather for, I think, a poll question is what comes up.
Yes.
Next.
Yes, so we're going to, okay, hang on one second while we switch the screens. So what we're going to do now is we just kind of want to see where everybody is in the process. So we're going to do a poll question to kind of give you a chance to talk about where you are in the process. So you have a couple of choices. You might still be in the data gathering phase where you're still trying to get your information together. You might be in the water audit phase where you're trying to put that information into the audit. You might be looking at data grades, just trying to get all those data grades into your audit. You may be looking at validity or gremlin hunting, or you may have actually started your toolbox triage or implementation phase. So James, if you will, open the poll, and we'll give everybody a chance to click in and say where they are in the process. Okay, so I guess we can maybe go ahead and close the poll now. Okay, so it looks like we have about a third of us are still gathering our data, about 40% of us are looking at improving our data validity, and 25% have started our toolbox triage. So we kind of have people at the beginning and end phases. All right, so let's move on. We're going to talk about just a couple of other things. As you might remember, when you came to class, we had everybody fill out class evaluations, and we'd ask you several questions. And one of the questions we asked was, do you have any suggestions for the future? And we gathered all of those suggestions, many of which were said more than once. And just to kind of give you a feel for the types of things that were suggested that we may be able to incorporate into future work in the area of water loss, people asked for handouts of slides, so we'll certainly take that into consideration. Really liked the group activities and thought maybe we should have more of those, and we'll certainly consider that. Offer the series more often, say twice a year, and perhaps have a refresher for the people that were involved in the class in 9 months. Creating a checklist or a manual of requirements to do the water audit. I think what folks were talking about there was maybe what information do you need, what you need to put in, that sort of thing. Wanted more real-life data or example utilities involved. And we did try to do that. We wanted to get more example data from utilities, but we did have difficulty getting folks to give us that data, but we'll certainly try for the future, and later on you'll see where you have an opportunity to be part of that. Make the slides bigger, easier to see, which we'll certainly try to address that. Have a dictionary/glossary of terms. When the participants were speaking, I think sometimes folks had a hard time hearing because some of the rooms were bigger and folks were kind of sitting down as opposed to the front. So we'll keep that in mind because a lot of the information was really good and we want everybody to hear it. Allow more time for the exercises. More emphasis in the course on data gathering. Have some kind of online forum or networking group and have the classes closer together. So all of these were suggestions for the future, and we will certainly think about all of these things and try to incorporate as many as we can within future classes. Suggestions for the future for, if we do this again, keep the group small, take training to other cities. So people had suggested some various cities in New Mexico where we could do this. Include examples of the way actual systems document data, so what processes were being used by current systems in New Mexico to maybe take build data or the master meter data, that kind of thing. A handout slide that shows corrective activities for each type of real loss, and integrate real loss spreadsheet into water audit spreadsheet. Now that, I believe, is somebody requesting that the Water Research Foundation integrate the spreadsheet on component analysis into the water audit spreadsheet. That's something that perhaps Will can take back to the water audit committee and see if there's any potential to do that. But unfortunately that's out of our hands, but it's a good thought for the future. And then have a computer for everyone, or advise people to bring laptops. We did try to do that, but maybe we'll do better in the future of trying to make it clear to bring your laptop. And then provide a condensed version of this workshop for trustees, which I think people mean elected leaders, board members, that type of thing. Confusing elements that were stated in the course. So these were things that people felt maybe were a little bit confusing in terms of what the course contained, and these were the ones that were most stated to least stated. So the grading and the scoring part was a little confusing to people. Some of the terminology, some of the calculations in math, categorizing losses, the weighting process, which I think people are talking about the flow weighting that we had to use for a couple of the audits, audit inputs, how to gather the data, the variable production cost average, which could either be the variable production cost, or they might actually be thinking of the customer meter or the customer retail cost, where you have to do some of the averaging, the relative costs of various components, and then the exercises. In some cases people found those to be confusing. So what I wanted to do now is talk a little bit about our homework that we did last time. What we included in our applied activity was completing a water audit if you had not already completed one, including the data grades and validity review, gathering our main break data, and or developing a process to collect it in the future. With the main break data, possibly performing a component analysis using that tool that was the Water Research Foundation component analysis tool, and again that one is also freely available on the web. And then looking at your non-revenue water to see which tools best apply. And this really applied only if your validity score was above 50, because if you were below 50 you really needed to stay in the stage of really looking at your data, looking for those gremlins, and that sort of thing. So this was what we were hoping everybody would be working on. If you have any questions about that, you can certainly type them in your chat box. If you need any assistance in this area, please let us know. We're here to help you. You can again let us know either via email or through the chat box that you're having issues and would like some assistance. Oops. I had an issue here where the here we go. My sorry about that. My PowerPoint jumped to the end and we skipped what I was hoping to go over, the initial and final surveys. If you remember, you took an initial survey at the beginning of the class and then a final survey if you were in class 4. What we had hoped to do was have a comparison between your answers in class 1 and your answers in class 4. We actually had several cases where different people attended class 1 than attended class 4. So we weren't able to do that direct comparison between each individual's responses. So however, for the people that were the same folks for the beginning and end of survey, we did notice higher responses on things like how important the issue of non-revenue water was. The majority of people found it to be a higher importance level after going through the class than before. The data quality was determined to be higher at the end than the beginning. And then the confidence level in their data was substantially higher for the people who did the before and after. So we don't have enough data to really present on each individual's responses before and after, but I wanted to just share some overall data from all the people that filled out the initial survey and all the people that filled out the final survey. So we looked at one question of what is the method of non-revenue water calculation from the initial surveys to the final surveys. So we ask if you did, say, an AWWA water audit, you did a simple calculation, maybe taking what you produce minus what you sell. Somebody responded that they had an Excel spreadsheet, and then if you had no audit of any kind. So we can see that there were the majority using a simple calculation or no audits. If we look at the final surveys, we do see quite an improvement in the number of systems using the AWWA water audit process. We still have quite a few doing a simple calculation, but way fewer people doing no audit of any kind. So that was a nice improvement from beginning to end, that we do see an uptick in the number of people using the AWWA water audit process. We ask another question, the importance of the non-revenue water to your system. Basically, was it the most important issue, a major issue but maybe not the most important, a concern but not in the top 5, a minor issue, etc. And we had maybe about a fourth of the people or so saying that it was the most important issue, and then several more saying it was a major issue. So way more than half said that it was a very important issue to them on the initial surveys, and we saw an even greater response in the final surveys, where more people thought it was the most important issue or a major issue. So it does remain a very big issue within the water utilities that attended, that they believe water auditing and water loss is a very important issue. The effectiveness of the program, we asked questions about basically, did you think that your program related to non-revenue water was effectively addressing your issues, addressing some issues but hadn't seen improvement, not sure, etc., all the way down to we have not begun a program to address non-revenue water at all. So it kind of ran the gamut of different levels of effectiveness. This is the initial surveys, and the final surveys show again that there's a higher level of effectiveness of the programs that people are using to address water audits. So we did see an improvement. Again, we couldn't really compare each individual's responses at the beginning and end, but we did see quite an improvement between the beginning and final surveys. And then we had talked about the applied activity already. So again, these were the activities that we wanted you to do, and if you have any questions or concerns about the activity, please let us know. What we'd like to do now is switch to talking about your water audits, and we have a poll question we'll ask first, basically where you are in the water audit process. So James, if you could open the second poll. Okay, can I see the screen? So in the second poll, we're asking you where you are in the process. So if you have not put any data into the audit at all, or you have a very small amount of data, you have some inputs entered but not the data grades, you have all the inputs and some but not all the grades entered, or your audit is essentially complete. So if you just take a moment to select the response that is most appropriate to you. And it looks like we have about 2/3 of the folks who have their audit essentially complete, and maybe 1/3 that has a small amount of data in there. So we have mostly people who have their audits complete, which is a very good thing. So what we want to do now is let's turn it back over to Drew or Will, who are going to speak about what we would like to do to request your water audits and an incentive to do so. So if we want to switch over to share the screen for Will, and we can talk about the water audit collection process.
All right, thank you very much, Heather. I'm going to actually just really talk to this one. This is one that we want to, my screen here, one that we want to put the call to action for those who have been in participating in this program, and you've made it through this far, and you've learned about doing a water audit. We talked about looking for gremlins, talked about bucket analysis, and kind of triage and making a plan of attack. All that said, If you have gotten to the point, or you are nearing the point where you have completed the top-down water audit and put those figures into your water audit spreadsheet and even done the data grades, we are asking that you give that to us. You provide that water audit to us, and in return, what we are offering is that we'll have our team of experts provide you with some feedback about your audit, and it could be feedback about Gremlins. It could be feedback about perhaps next steps in your water loss program, some areas to focus on. And this is kind of an added bonus for your participation in this training program. So this is a call to action for those who have gone through the program to this point. Send us your water audit, and we are asking that be provided, and we're putting a timeline on that for the next 2 weeks. The deadline is the 23rd of June. That's 2 weeks from today. And there is an email address. I don't actually have it on the screen at the moment, but you should receive an email following this webinar with instructions on where to send your audit. And as always, if you have Heather's contact or my contact, you're welcome to send it to that as well. Any way you can get it to us is great, but we'll provide a specific email address for you to send it to as well. To help folks who are close but not quite over the finish line, we're also providing a little bit of an incentive, and that is if you get your audit to us in that time frame by the 23rd of June, we're going to enter you into a drawing, and the prize for the drawing is going to be two things. One for your utility, which is the latest and greatest hot off the press M36 manual from the American Water Works Association. It just came out in February. It is the 4th edition, and this is the go-to authoritative reference document that has everything from auditing to gremlin hunting to component analysis to developing your water loss control program. So it's kind of the Bible of water loss control in North America. So that's part of the prize, and as an added bonus, we're going to throw in a gift card that will come embedded in the document. So you can use that as you like. You don't have to actually tell us how you decide to use the gift card, if you will. So that's the deal. We're asking for your water audit to be emailed to us by June 23rd, and we'll enter you in for a drawing for the manual and gift card, and we'll also provide you with specific feedback from our team of experts on your audit and what your next steps might be for your water loss program. So we hope that's enough to get you over the line, and you'll be willing to share that with us. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, Heather.
All right, so hopefully now you're sufficiently incentivized to want to send us your water audit, and it also is something that will help us for future classes. You know, as people mentioned, they wanted some more, quote, real data. We did use a lot of real data, but it wasn't from New Mexico. So if you enter this stuff, you know, this will also give us a cadre of real information to use for the future. So please, hopefully, you're incentivized enough to send in your water audit. We want to close out today's webinar with a chance for NMED to talk about next steps and any closing remarks they have. So I will turn it over to Peter right now to please share any closing thoughts and discussions of next steps.
Thanks, Heather. Good morning, everybody. And this is Peter Nathanson. I'm the Technical Services Team Manager for the Drinking Water Bureau, and I've been at most of the sessions. So I've talked to some of you that attended both the Albuquerque and Chamita sessions for both the large and small systems. I first want to thank Heather and Will for working together so collaboratively on this program and bringing together their areas of expertise to energize this new program in New Mexico. Remembering that we currently do not have any requirements for water loss auditing within New Mexico, unlike some other states that are actually providing regulatory incentive for systems to do annual audits. We haven't progressed to that point yet. However, there are a couple of good reasons why systems would want to do these audits. One actually is required by the Office of State Engineer for permit changes or 40-year water planning documents. And so they have their own internal requirements associated with water audits. For the Drinking Water Bureau, one of the ways that we're encouraging systems to look at water auditing through the AWWA M36 methodology is when a system comes to us specifically requesting system improvement money through the Drinking Water State Revolving Loan Fund. We rank systems. When they come to us asking for money, we look at various components, both from a technical, managerial, and financial perspective. And part of those requirements contain minimum criteria. Now, water loss auditing is not currently one of those minimum criteria, but once a system pops through the capacity assessment for those TM and F criteria and makes it to the next step, all those systems that come through that process as being recognized as good candidates for funding will be ranked. And at the upper end of that ranking, systems are eligible for subsidy money, and below a certain threshold, depending on how much money we have each year, systems below that threshold would not be eligible for the subsidies. One of the ways that we will be ranking systems will be asking if they are engaged in the M36 water auditing process. So that provides a lot of incentive to take what you've learned here and move forward. And I've said several times throughout the 4 different training sessions for the smalls and the 2 sessions for the large systems, we don't want you to stop at this point. We want you to continue to move forward, and we're going to piggyback on this incentive that Will has just invited you to participate with in doing your audits. We want to, and we are able to, then provide one-on-one assistance with you from our group at the Drinking Water Bureau to help you with any part of the process you're engaged with, whether you're still at the beginning or moving into the toolbox implementation phase. We can provide one-on-one technical assistance. We can also provide 1 to several types of trainings to refresh your basic concepts understanding of the water loss auditing progress and program. We also are looking at a phase 2 with Cavanaugh and the EFC. That's still being looked at now in terms of budget and scope of work. And Heather, I believe the EFC is also available for one-on-one and training activities. So with all that, please don't be shy in reaching out either directly to myself and my group here in the tech team at the Drinking Water Bureau or with EFC. And as the phase 2 activities become better defined, have that scope of work nailed down, then we will notify everybody, again, those that attended this round, this phase 1, and of course all the rest of the systems in New Mexico. So also tell your neighbors, if you're moving into any of these steps in the basic concepts and developing those concepts and working through the audit, don't be shy about sharing the benefits you're realizing with any neighbor systems that you happen to run across either at professional meetings or in other situations. So we encourage you to stay in touch and keep an ear out for any phase 2 activities that'll be formally presented to the systems in New Mexico. And with that, I can turn that back over to you, Heather, for the close.
And I don't think we've had any questions come in. Oh wait, whoops. We just got a question, hang on. Okay. We had a question, would we keep the names confidential on the water audit data that's submitted? I think what we can do is we don't need to share that data with anybody. If we use it in a future training, we'll take your name off of it. That's what I've done in the past when I've had water audits that I want to show examples. We've always removed the name and given it some other name like the Valley Water System or, you know, the green system or something like that. So we can definitely, if we use it in the future, we will take your names off of it and keep that confidential. In terms of whether or not the state will know who submitted them, I guess that's kind of up to Peter. Is it necessary for you to know who submits the water audits to us, or how would you like to handle that part?
The only reason we would need to know who is submitting the audit is if it's being asked for specifically through the documentation phase of a funding action. You know, if we're ranking a project and part of that ranking looks at whether or not the system has conducted water loss auditing through a AWWA M36, yes, we would need to know who that system is to be able to substantiate that activity. But if it's just for general information, no. I mean, and this brings up a good point. My team is technical assistants, and it's a new group, you know, 2 years new within the Bureau. And we do not do compliance or enforcement. We help systems with compliance and enforcement return to compliance status, but we don't tattletale, so to speak. If we're out at a system or a system's working with us and they have some situations, we don't then turn around and tell the compliance officer, oh, go check out, you know, PWS 123 because they're out of compliance. We work with you directly as a technical assistance provider, and so we would not be concerned about your compliance only insofar as the activities we're helping you with bring you back into compliance. So for us to be able to help a system through any step of the audit process, yeah, we would need to know who you are so we could work with you, but there's no reason why we would publish your information unless we are doing a one-to-many training and the system representative wants to share their audit results and audit experience with the rest of the attendees. So there's really, it's really up to the system, but again, there's no confidentiality, you know, as part of the process.
Okay, Will, do you have anything you want to add?
Nothing to add there. I think that maybe just a final comment, just to encourage everybody to submit it. It really, the point of providing your audit to us as the action from here is to get feedback from our training team, and we'll protect that, you know, protect that feedback. But that's the point, is to really get that. And also, did we mention the M36 manual and the gift card? Just mention those again.
And the manual is really good, and it's actually quite expensive, so it's a really good incentive to get a very complete, very thorough manual that if you went on your own to buy would be somewhere in the order of about $130 to $150. So it's a pretty big incentive. So and you know, I think it would help us to see kind of where you're at, where you are in the process. I mean, it's really a beneficial thing all the way around, and we want to do it really just to help you. It's not meant to be any way to call you out or anything like that. It's just a way to help you, to give you some feedback, give you a chance to kind of see where you are in the process, give us that chance. So we strongly encourage you to do it. A question came in as to where to send them. We will be sending an email out, but it's going to be going to Drew Blackwell, and we'll be sending you an email that will give all the details of how to get the audits turned in and where to go. So be expecting some follow-up information about that.
Yep, sounds good.
All right, well, it looks like we had no more questions, and we're right at 1 hour, which is what we had planned for this webinar, so we want to thank everybody who was able to attend today. We appreciate your being on. We did record the session, so if you know anybody who missed it or you need to listen to any of it later, feel free to listen to the recorded webinar. We'll also send out information on where to access that. Thank you again, and I hope everybody has a great day, and we appreciate you being part of the New Mexico statewide water loss control training program. Thank you.